So in this video, I'm going to be giving you a little taste of our components editor in action. So basically what I'm going to do is I'm just going to be manipulating our components, dragging them into the viewer, placing them, reorganizing them, all this cool stuff, just so you can see in action how all of our different windows, or rather I should say different sections of our UI come together. Great, so let's get started. So the first thing I want to teach you, or I want to show you, is how we place our components in the viewer. We've done this a few times before, but I just want to make sure that you have a good grounding in it because you're going to be doing that quite a bit when we're making our applications. So how exactly do we do that? Well, we're going to go into our palette right off to the left here, and we're going to just click and hold on whatever component we want and drag it in. In this case, I'm going to just drag in, first off, a label. So I'm going to left click and hold. Pull, you'll notice it now appears underneath my mouse. I'm holding down the left mouse button, and wherever I go, that component goes. If I were to release it here, not in the middle here, essentially if I don't see a blue line, it's just going to disappear. Nothing's going to happen. So I released it, nothing happened. But if I go and I grab that again, left click and hold, and now I see a blue line in the middle and I release, there you have it. We have just added a component into our viewer. And we can verify that by going over to our components section and seeing that we actually have a label underneath our screen. Great, so I just dragged and I placed a label into our viewer. Now I want to place in a few buttons. So I'm going to do the exact same thing. I'm going to left click and hold on the button. It now appears under my mouse. So now I know that I actually have it selected and I'm grabbing it. And now I'm just going to release, noticing that there's a blue line there. So I am in fact placing my button in our viewer. There you have it. I released and I added my button. I'm just going to do that a couple of the times. I'm going to add 5 buttons actually. So you'll notice it's just that simple. Great. So now we just covered placing our components. The way we would reorganize a component, actually before I go into reorganization, I want to just note that under my screen section and my component section, I have all 5 of those buttons that I just added, as well as my label. So I just verified that everything came in properly into my viewer. Great. So how do we reorganize our buttons, or our components, I should say? Well, the way I'm going to do that is the same way I grabbed my button from my palette. That's how I'm going to grab my button from my viewer. I'm just going to left click and hold. You'll notice now a blue line pops up again. And the way I reorganize it is wherever that blue line is, when I release it, that's where our button's going to go. So you'll notice if I were to release it here, it would still be between button 2 and 4. But if I were to drag it just a bit higher, you'll notice my blue line goes in different locations. So say I want it between button 1 and 2 now. I'm going to just drag it just a little bit higher, and you'll notice my blue line is between 1 and 2. When I release, there you have it. I just reorganized my components. Let's say I want my button 5 to be between my label and my button 1. I'm going to drag it all the way to the top, release, and there you have it. Button 1 is now between 1 and 5. So reorganizing components is just that simple. Great. So now I want to actually modify the properties of these components. So what I want to do is I'm going to click on my label. So whenever I want to modify the properties of a component, I have to make sure it's selected. We went over knowing how something is selected in our previous videos, right? We go to our components section and we check if there's a green background around it. You'll notice right now button 5 is selected. Not only is there a green background behind the component in our component section, but there's also an outline around it in our viewer. So you'll notice there's a green outline around our button 5. So I want to change some properties for our text label. So I'm going to either select it in the viewer like this, or I'm going to go to my component section and select it like this. Either way would work. Great. So label is now selected, label 1. I want to change what shows up on the label. So I'm going to look in my properties section and I'm going to say, okay, text is probably what I want to modify here, right? Because I want to change what text shows up for that particular label. So I'm going to just say, buttons are below, right? And maybe I want to make that a little bit bigger. I want to make it, 22 font size. So font size is how large our font actually is. And this is pretty simple, right? I'm just modifying how large or how big. I want it a little bit bigger. I increase the number. So I'm going to say 30, right? Cool. So that looks that looks correct, rather, I should say. That looks like what I want. Great. So there's a few other things we could do to the label. Maybe if we wanted to, I could change the font type. I'm going to say font typeface. And I'm going to say, I want it to be monospace. And there you have it, our font type changes. Excuse me. Great. So I've just modified some properties for my text label. Now I want to modify the properties of my buttons. So I'm going to change what these buttons all say. So the first button, I want to say hello. So I'm going to modify that text here. So I selected it, I went to my properties, and then I looked for the text property. So I'm going to say hello, and I'm going to press enter when I've confirmed my changes. Then I'm going to do the same thing for the next button. I'm going to just put how though. And then I'm going to do the same thing for our third button, and I'm going to say R. And then the same thing for this button, I'm going to say U. Which brings us to our next thing that we're going to do. So we just went over, so far we've gone over placing components, reorganizing components, and modifying the properties for components. Now I want to show you how to delete components. So I want, hello, how are you here, but it looks like we have another, or rather I should say an extra button. I don't really want this anymore. So what I'm going to want to do to delete that button is I'm going to click on it, once again from the viewer or the component section. I'm just going to do it from the component section. And then I'm going to click on delete. It's just that simple. Once I click on delete, I have a confirmation window, and it says, hey, deleting this component will delete all blocks associated with it in the blocks editor. So I'm going to essentially just click OK, and now it disappears. Perfect. We just deleted a component. Great. So the last thing I want to show you is how we rename our components and why that's so important. So you'll notice that here now in our viewer, our components viewer, I have a hello button, a how button, an R button, and a U button. But if I look at the associated components with, or rather the associated name in the component section of these buttons, you'll notice it can get a bit confusing because my hello button in my component section is button 5. And my how button is button 1, so on and so forth, right? Now you might think, oh, what's the big deal here? Not a big deal, right? I mean, I still know what they are. I just have to select them here. And you're right. But this is where this can become a bit complicated. When I click on this block section, you'll notice that now if I wanted to program some blocks for these buttons, I would have to essentially map which one is what. So I'd say hello is button 5. Okay, so if I want to modify how our how button works or our hello button works, I'd have to know, okay, that's button 5. That's how I'm gonna, okay, I got to remember that. What is my, R? What's my R button? Is it button 1? I don't know, right? Wouldn't it just be easier if we just named these components the same thing as what the text label is? I think so. So the way we do that is we just say, okay, button 5, right, is hello. So I'm just going to click on rename, and then I'm going to say, hello. And then button 1 is how, so I'm going to say, how. Button 3, I'm going to rename, and that's R. So you notice it says old name and new name. I probably should go over that. So the old name is just what it was. The new name is what we're about to name it. So now I'm going to say R. I'm going to click OK. And then lastly, button 2 is U. So I'm going to rename, type in U, and click OK. So now you'll notice they map exactly. Hello is hello, how is how, R is R, and U is U. So now when we go to our block section, if I wanted to modify, what the hello button does, it's very simple. I just look and I say, hey, hello button is this one. U button is this one. R button is this one, right? No more confusion as to what button is what. So to recap, we just went over placing our components from our palette, reorganizing our components in our viewer, modifying the properties of our individual components, and renaming components so that we don't get confused in the block section. So I know that was quite a bit of information. Don't worry, it is a video. We can replay it if we have to. So that's essentially what we're going to be doing when we're building our application. I hope you enjoyed and you learned something, and I'll see you in the next video.